Okay, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll get going with the interview with yourself, Julian. Great, thanks very much for being up for doing it, and welcome everybody that's on the Facebook live stream. I know it says already 4 people on there as well, so Maureen's, Samantha, Howard as well, I think it was. A couple of names popped up. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them on the system, to Kim as well. Feel free to stick them on there, and I'll make sure that I keep checking it and come back when I'm talking to him. Okay, so this wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, mate. Obviously, you know, I'm a big fan of this, as you well know, and the pictures are always in the background of everything that we do. And so you were talking at this point when you were doing this book that there would be another one that you would do to cover the thousands of photographs that you've taken for all of the research that you've done.
Yes.
So, I mean, what was the original inspiration behind that, and how the project looks now?
I guess it was, you know, the fact that as you say, I've got thousands upon thousands of images of all sorts of things, really, that I've taken over the years of making specific visits to not just the Holocaust sites, but to sites of interest in Jewish history, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. So it was what to do with them, really. Obviously, some went into suspended disbelief, but obviously a very select few. And I was just conscious that what do you do with these images? And I just wanted a way, really, of showing them, and obviously just finding out how the best way to do that is has been the biggest, not headache as such, but the biggest challenge. You know, do you do it in a book form? Do you do it in a website form? Do you do it in speeches and stuff? How do you get this across? So I guess, from various reams, I explored the book route, and then I thought, well, actually, how much control do you have over the quality of the images in a book? And so then I thought, well, a website is the obvious thing. So, and hence, we now have launched today on this, obviously very specific date, obviously November the 9th. We now have a new website. So hopefully that will stimulate more people to go and visit the sites that I've been to, take some photos of themselves. And obviously it's going to stimulate me to continue doing the same thing.
Brilliant. Now, before we start, obviously you've used the domain name shoah.info, which is great. So hopefully you'll get a wider audience from that point of view. So just explain for anybody that's watching on the live stream, not so necessarily what the difference is between the Holocaust and the Shoah, but why would that term be used by people, the Shoah?
Well, Shoah is a specific name. It's Hebrew, and it's a name that's widely used within Jewish communities to refer to exactly the same thing, to refer to the Holocaust. It means catastrophe, and essentially, obviously, the Shoah was a catastrophe in so many shapes and forms. It also, I guess, it sort of, even though my website doesn't do this, it also refers to the very specific nature of the genocide against the Jews conducted within Nazi Germany. My website goes a bit broader than that. It covers images that reflect some of the other victims of the Nazi regime. And I guess the other thing, John, is that Shoah is also probably, it evokes memories of a very famous film that was made in the 70s by a French filmmaker called Claude Lanzmann, and it's about 9 hours in length. It's massive thing.
Undertaking,
yeah. But Lanzmann used just solely contemporary film. He didn't use period photos. He went to places. He talked to people. He showed on film what was currently there. And so where Lanzmann used film, I thought I'll use photography. So there's a little bit of a connection between, the film that was in the 70s and now obviously the website that is today in 2020.
And before we have a look at the website, so we'll get the website up in a moment. I think for me, knowing something about the subject, probably maybe more than most people, even I find the images quite difficult to look at, because it's more about, you have to fill in what you know has happened there. And I think, you know, I know Kim's listening on the live stream. I think, you know, one of the great things about working with Kim Sadek as the chair of the Remembering Srebrenica East Midland board is looking at some of the photos that she's taken with students and stuff, where you go to not just the sites where it is, it's the fact that you're not looking at the historical picture or the picture was captured at the time. It's your imagination then fills those gaps in and stuff. What is it like going to these places? I know you're going there specifically to research it, but suddenly, you know, it has a different meaning to you surely than some of the other people that are standing around.
I think so. I think what I've tried to do is and what I've done in my visits is go beyond what is actually well documented, and to visit places that are actually a bit off the beaten track, but also some places that are very obvious places, but which are actually not known. So I remember, for example, in Lublin, in southeast Poland, I actually stayed in a hotel that at the time of the Nazi occupation was the propaganda ministry. It had a large antennae right on top of the building, in which all the Nazi propaganda that went out across that region emanated from that building. Now, unless you did a bit of research, unless you actually knew the fact, there's nothing on the plaque that said on the outside of a hotel that says this is where this happened. You'd miss it. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to do. Go beyond the surface, go to places that are slightly different, that are Jewish homes, you know, Jewish synagogues, centres, even a sports stadium that was built by Jewish labour. You know, it's, and what I'm asking, I guess, because what I did when I take these photographs is knowing the context. It adds a dimension to it that is, yes, it's about interpretation, yes, it's about imagination, but also you're encouraging people to feel the relevance. I think that's the phrase. It's feeling the relevance. What is relevant about this particular place? And the relevance for me is that these are everyday places that people lived in, that people experienced 75, 80 plus years ago, that are now something maybe slightly different. So yes, anyone that goes to the likes of Auschwitz and Dachau and Sobibor, anyone that walks the streets of the Jewish ghettos in Warsaw, Krakow and so forth, they're quite well known, you know, that there are things on the walls to guide you as to what you're actually seeing. But if you're in the middle of an area of a city that once was a hotbed of the Jewish community, where now there is nothing or virtually nothing to show that once was a Jewish community there, you have to search your imagination, and you have to try and take a sort of cross-historical approach, really. It's like trying to put yourself there, trying to walk in the steps that people walked every day, not that long ago, in living memory of some people, and to try and feel the history and to actually evoke it. So, you know, the Holocaust has lots of iconic images, but what I'm trying to put through across with images that I've chosen are places that are commonplace, you know, that they're there to be seen now. You know, there's still evidence of this wherever you go, really, and varying on where you go to. In Germany, you know, there's lots and lots of, they have called the Stolpersteiner project, these brass marble things that are on the pavements, which I'll show in the thing. They're, you know, again, even there, you see, they're down on the pavement. So anyone looking and walking around, looking at the shops with their eyes at this sort of level, doesn't see them. So once you start looking down, you then see them everywhere, you know, and they're like ghosts. They're once you start opening your mind to this, you're then opening your mind to something far bigger. And that's what I'm trying to do, I guess, through the site.
And is that how we push back against the Holocaust denial, people or movement? Is it not putting more images out there or more film of things that have been seen before, but actually new ways of explaining it to people that almost, and I don't mean normalize, I can't think of a better word than that at the moment, you know, so it's just the impact on ordinary people, the ordinariness of it in this extraordinary situation, as opposed to something that was specific and spontaneous. It's the organization that goes behind it, isn't it?
Yes, and I think when you go through the site and you see particular graves maybe or particular situations and so forth, what I try and do is I try and tell individual stories. So you can go to any site of Holocaust remembrance. You can go to any Jewish cemetery in some of, not just in Polish big cities, but in little Polish small villages and towns and so forth. And you can choose to look at the vastness of what's there, and you can choose to look at individual graves. And individual graves tell a story in the same way those Stolperstein and vast marble things, they tell a story. So it's bringing to life an individual story, a person that actually is rarely looked at, that if you think about it, the most common person, the most popular image, I guess, or the most common person that is cited as being a victim of the Holocaust is probably Anne Frank, and for obvious reasons. But there are another 6 million Anne Franks out there, they didn't all write a diary, but they all had a story. And then if you add on top of that the number of Soviet prisoners of war, the number of gypsy and traveller victims, the number of gay victims, the number of trade unionists, the number of politicians, the number of ordinary Polish people, communists, other political parties, you're then adding something that's absolutely massive. And I think that's really what I'm trying to do is taking the enormity of it, but also contextualize it individually. So that a synagogue, a site of a former synagogue, becomes a place not just of a recollection of the past, but a place that was a key part of people's existence not that long ago.
Yeah. Before we show the website, which I'm definitely going to do next, was a quick question on here from Andy. Andy Goss is on, so great to see him online.
Nice one, Andy. Yeah.
And he was saying about with his own German heritage as well, this kind of collective guilt. You know what I mean? That he feels about that as also, and he says when he looks back at how Germany went from a liberal democracy in 1930 to a totalitarian state in 3 years, we kind of lose track of how quickly these things happen. I suppose at the moment, with the whole American election thing, how Trump has gone, Trump's come in and pushed America so much further than anyone could imagine. Is it too much? Is it possible to get back from without that kind of conflict? I think it took World War II to get rid of that, didn't it? That kind of collective support for that kind of thing. What are you sensing when you're walking around, when you're putting these books and websites together and taking photos and you're having conversations? Are you talking to people about it? What they say?
I think yes. I guess I'm challenging, not necessarily challenging those that are still perpetrators of discrimination, perpetrators of genocide, or who, if they had the chance, would become again perpetrators and supporters of genocidal acts. Sometimes those sorts of people, they're okay. You should never give up on people. That's one thing I would say. But with people with such entrenched views, sometimes you struggle to penetrate the veneer that they put around them. It's the masses, the far more populous people around individuals like that. I was going to say the ordinary people that have the potential to turn away from this type of regime, this type of worldview, but who don't necessarily do so, that don't necessarily stand up and oppose. And that doesn't mean just by going on rallies and being politically active. It means in everyday things. It means eschewing and un-Facebook friending people that they see that suddenly start spouting this sort of stuff. It's within all of us to actually defeat this, and I think that's the lesson from Nazi Germany. If you look at Germany in the 20s and the as I say, as Dandy says, right up until 1930. It was very much a liberal democracy. It was a hotbed of all sorts of other things as well. There was large extreme left-wing movements, as well as there were large right-wing movements. But if you look at Berlin as a city, the Nazis never properly controlled Berlin in the sense that there was always resentment, there was always resistance. And if you look at the thriving LGBTQI scene that was in Weimar, the public Weimar Republic of Germany, if you read Christopher Isherwood's books, for example, and look at any film that's got books of Christopher Isherwood, it shows it. There was a lot of this. There was a lot of liberal sentiment, a lot of acceptance of other people and so forth. And yet, very, very quickly, growing on the seeds of injustice and growing on the seeds of people who were, let's be honest, very, very skilled at what they did. And I'm not necessarily thinking of Hitler here. I'm thinking of the likes of Goebbels, who was very much the master, if you like, of evil propaganda, but propaganda nevertheless. He knew how to interpret and change the narrative. He knew how to put out things that were commonly accepted. Hitler used to say, isn't it, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. Yeah. If you keep repeating the same things over and over again, which is what Goebbels did, is what the Nazi propaganda did, the more people will gradually accept these things as being true. So, and it has all that sort of ramifications today as well, mate.
And it's really interesting because what you're saying there, and the sort of contemporariness of the American elections and populism and stuff like that, fits really well with the Doc Media Centre, because the two comments here, Andy's just followed up with his German grandfather's memoir, which covers the 20s and the 30s and the war years, which he's reading now, said provides quite an interesting German perspective on it, which I'm sure would inform some of the stuff that you've done. And then Paul Riley, who's joined us as well, which is great to have Paul online. He was saying there's a great article by Gemma Kamain and also Rebecca Potton on Instagram and the Holocaust, and they argued that Instagram encouraged conversations and empathy about the Holocaust and kept it visible amongst young people. Perhaps social media isn't all toxic all of the time, while acknowledging that Holocaust deniers do use online platforms to promote hate speech and conspiracy theories. There's a really interesting one, isn't it? So something can be used for bad. What a terrible way of explaining what the Holocaust was, bad. Yeah. But that's the first thing I could think of. So terrible, but at the same time can be used to push back against promoting tolerance and acceptance, and also keeping that kind of education alive.
And it has to be used, and it is being used. And I guess one of the and I need to say this really, one of the refreshing things from certainly my trips and visits to Germany. And to correspondence that I've had with German people of my age, but also German people a lot younger than me, is this notion that and whether it comes from a sense of historical guilt, which they shouldn't feel. Anybody that wasn't alive during the Nazi period, how can they feel guilty? But there is still that sort of collective national, almost like a call to arms within German circles, within German society, to, it's still our responsibility to show what happened in our country so that it doesn't happen again here and doesn't happen again anywhere. And that's beautiful, because when you see people, when you talk to people, Holocaust curators in museums, I remember going to the Wannsee conference place there in Berlin, the place where the final solution was virtually ratified by Reinhard Heydrich in probably the most infamous historical meeting of all time. When you go there and you talk to the creators and you say, what's the impact on German young people? And they say, well, they come alive with this. They see the relevance of this, that it hits them, because it introduces uncomfortable things that they may still be able to trace even now. How do they ask their grandparents? Yeah. Well, you were alive during this, what did you do? How did you live?
That conversation, sort of isn't it?
It's that conversation that they have. And I think it impels us, everyone that doesn't have that sense of immediacy that's there within German society, obviously. It propels anyone that's not German in that respect to support that notion of actually fighting back, and fighting back with the evidence, because the evidence is there. Yeah. And to be honest, mate, some of the biggest sources of evidence are the Nazis themselves. Rudolf Höss, Commandant of Auschwitz, he said, I murdered 1.5 million Jews here.
Yeah.
He didn't hide from it. He said that's what we did. And that was just 1.5 million Jews. You can think of the other categories of people on top of that as well. you're talking 2 million people. So if they're there saying, well, there's no point in denying it. Here's the evidence. The evidence of cameras, the British troops who obviously found Bergen-Belsen, and the iconic image of Richard Dimbleby speaking from Belsen, the Soviet troops that found, Auschwitz, that found Majdanek and various places like that. The evidence was there. The Nazis couldn't hide it. They tried to. They tried to hide it, but they couldn't. And I guess one of the images that we might want to come back to short, in our discussion, is the image of mass graves being excavated, and that is happening now, or was happening certainly at the time I took the photographs, and these things bring that to life more than anything else.
Well, I think we'll get the website up now, because that fits quite well with some of the comments that Paul and Andy have expanded on. Also, Kim's put on as well about keywords that we use and images and stuff, and how important it is. So let's dive into the website now. So I'm going to share it, and obviously all of those comments are still going to be there for you to look at afterwards. And you might even want to comment specifically back to some of that. So tell me when that website appears for you.
That's fine. It's up, mate.
Okay, cool. So from our brief explanation earlier, what we've got is, obviously you go through to shoah.info, and it's got a menu bar across the top, which may not be completely visible on the Facebook stream. So it's shoah.info. If anyone's going online at the same time while they're listening to this, it's got a how to view section. So I'll just click on this, because what I like about it is the fact that it's almost arranged in sectional categories, if you like, that fit with book chapters, doesn't it? So it's got before, which is life prior to the Shoah, persecution, the mechanics and actions of the embryonic Nazi state, ghetto, that's forced incarceration and the division of towns and cities, detention, the concentration camps, extermination, the final solution and the culmination of genocide, and maybe most importantly, in this context, is that afterwards, that life in all its manifestations goes on, and how it is there all the time, with modern life slowly covering it up, but it's still there if you know what you're looking for. And obviously the kind of the future, what was the key behind putting these kind of sections together, Julian?
Well, I guess the first thing to say probably is that I initially envisaged this as a book, and a book of photographs. And so when I was conscious of what I was taking, I thought, well, actually, the photographs have got to tell a story, just as a book would tell a story. So hence the separation into those various chapters. And obviously, people can view this in a number of different ways. Obviously, you can go to the various chapter headings, which you basically eloquently put out. Before, which is Jewish life before the Holocaust came into being, persecution, all the things that you've just mentioned. And basically, if you can go through it chronologically, you can go through it if you click on the very first one right at the top of the left-hand page, which shows the Jewish sign in Prague. If you click on that, what comes up is the image again. What comes up on the side of it, though, is a description of the image and a number. And effectively, if you then clicked on this, you would do a slideshow to go on. You can go through it from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, right the way through to the end of the chapter. And that's the narrative that tells you, in a deliberate way, the story from start to finish in that sort of chapter, if you like. Obviously, some cases the wording is more extensive than others. I've included a bigger description. Some photographs I've included maybe a couple of words, because I want the image to say what I can't say in words. It's impossible to say in words, just to let the image speak for itself. So you can look at it in that way, or if you went back and you just looked at the page itself, the before page, and then if you wanted just to click on any item at all, because you thought, oh, that's an interesting photo. What does it look like? What's that supposed to be? I've seen that before. You can just click on any image and it'll tell you what it is. So you can look at it in many ways, to say, go through it chronologically from start to finish of each chapter. But if you wanted to find out what a particular image was, you just click on it and it comes up. And that's the same with all the before, right the way through persecution, detention, all that stuff, right the way through to the aftermath, if you like, and aftermath. So that's how it works. Very simple, very simple. You know, and if you go to afterwards, obviously we're now looking at what you could see now. You're looking at the consequences, if you like. So obviously there are lots of images of graves. There are lots of places where you can visit. This one, you know, this is probably symptomatic of a lot of places, but on a much bigger scale. You know, we're talking 43,000 people, Jewish people that were murdered, whose graves are like this in a vast field in Łódź in Poland. And if you went to, you know, lots of other Jewish sites, there may not be as many, but there will be sites of this as well. What sometimes you find, which is a legacy of what the Nazis did, was that they didn't want to Nazis didn't just want to eradicate Jewish life; they wanted to eradicate Jewish existence.
Yeah.
So all traces of previous life, which included gravestones, they weren't exempt from Nazi rage and Nazi savagery. So you'll find in a lot of cemeteries in Poland and elsewhere, the broken gravestones still lying around that are the legacy of the destruction at the time. And they tell a story as well. So it's there. And then obviously as well, you're looking at memorials, you're looking potentially, if you go to the one beneath that, John, look at that one. That's fine. That's an image of faces that peer out to you at Dachau, sorry, just outside Berlin. But if you go back to,
can I just say on that image, you were saying about your third paragraph there says statistics can never do justice to the fact that these were individual human beings with hopes, aspirations, and dreams. And I think that's been some of the really powerful work that I saw in Cambodia at S21 at the Sleng Genocide Museum, and also some of the work that that Kim's been doing with Remembering Srebrenica, looking at some of the images that we've shared with school groups that have come and stuff. It's and when you talk to the survivors, it's that stuff that's as important with the images. Maybe they need to be presented together.
I definitely agree. I mean, this image obviously shows people that in their camp garb, if you like, their camp uniforms, what they wore when they were detained and kept in Sachsenhausen. One of the most haunting places you can go to in Auschwitz, for example, is a building that used to be the old spa sauna area of the site, and where you see the museum have put contemporary images of everyday Jewish life. So you see the type of snapshots and photographs that we all take, and family groups, people celebrating bar mitzvahs, people celebrating Hanukkah, people walking down the street. They're all there, and there are thousands upon thousands, not millions, of photographs that were left around the camps and around places after the Nazis had gone. And at Auschwitz, they're all contained on a wall, and you can look at them, and you can see, you know, lovely children's faces smiling out. Those sort of, you know, annual pictures that we all, well, I guess, back in the 1930s and 1940s, and maybe even afterwards, you know, were commonplace. We all had them, you know, even in this country. You know, I remember being, you know, this is the family photo for this year. We need to look nice. We need to put on our best kit. We need to get a photographer in to do it. That's all those images are. But they're massively important because it shows them not as victims, but as real people, as people with lives that were taken away, but people doing ordinary things, you know. And so it's unless you actually look at those faces and look behind them and see beneath the surface and imagine the conditions in which they were forced to change their lives very, very rapidly, from having carefree existence to suddenly there's the descent of this evil presence called the Nazi regime on their lives. And then all of a sudden, before people even know it, it descends on you to such an extent that it takes your life away. And I think that's the key thing that rightly you say, you know, you can see it in Cambodia, you can see it in Srebrenica, You can see it in lots of other genocides and lots of other people's attempts to keep these genocidal images alive, because they're really, really important.
I guess that's one of the key things, coming back to something you said earlier about not only were the Nazis trying to get rid of the Jews as individuals, but actually their entire existence. And I suppose those kind of images that you're talking about, but also the images that are on this website of the fact that you're still able to see where these places exist, mean that ultimately they did fail in that in that task, because we're still able to know that they were there and still find those signs. And that's one of the things that's really important, isn't it, I guess, to push back against that Holocaust denial. It's not only the images that the Nazis took themselves and put out, and were very good at documenting and also cataloguing to an extent, and recording the people that were killed. It's amazing how the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia were very good at photographing everybody at S21. And that's the reason it still exists, and why it existed afterwards when the Vietnamese came in, because people were going there to find people they knew that had gone into that venue. And it lasted for such a long time. It then became a museum.
I mean, there's lots of sort of parallels that you can use for this, but I think one of the things that comes into my mind, especially after the weekend, obviously with Remembrance Sunday, was the notion that, you know, lots of Holocaust survivors, there's lots of accounts of Holocaust survival now being written and have over the last 5-10 years. And it's no coincidence, you know, Holocaust survivors are coming towards the end of their life, their natural lives, and they want to contribute something in written form, pictorial form before they go, in the same way that First World War veterans did sort of 15-20 years ago. But I think, you know, when you go round these sites and you can still see the sites, in some cases there's been nothing that's happened since the Germans and the Nazis left. You know, you can visit, you can walk around sort of derelict buildings in suburbs of Polish cities and Latvian cities and Lithuanian cities and even Czech cities, and you can still literally go to these places and there's nothing to stop you. The only thing that prevents you, I guess, one is a little bit of, these are derelict places, they're not always safe places, but also the fact that unless you actually know what you're looking for, you can just walk past this and know it's an old building. You know, you might be missing the fact that this old building was formerly the Jewish hospital of the ghetto, or this old building was formerly the meeting place, or fulfilled the function of a community centre during the ghetto. Now, these places you can go to, but there will become a time when they won't exist. You know, either they'll fall down through their own dereliction, or urban planners will recognise the need for space, for extra business space and so forth. And just like the poor Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic is gradually eroding itself, it's dying all the time, the rust is taking it away, nature is taking it away. At some period, sometime in the future, you'll be able to walk around these places and they'll all be modern buildings. And that's the danger, is that you don't take note of them while they're still there. And I think that's the key to my photographs, is that I have taken note of these places while they're still there.
Yeah. Now, this image here, you got some wonderful comments as well, very supportive comments about it as an educational resource from Paul and Andy and stuff like that. So please make sure that you look at their comment section.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
That's great. It's lovely to see that while you're talking. I'm reading these at the same time, so it's a double honour. I've got you, and I've got people of respect for making good comments. You know, this picture here, which I'm not sure if you can fully pick it out on the Facebook, but basically is like an excavation that's going on with a group of people. And I'll just read out what you've written next to it. So it says, the site of mass graves. At the time of my visit, I'd been to Auschwitz and Dachau. I'd explored the Warsaw Ghetto and walked the streets of, is that Terezin?
Terezin, yeah.
Terezin. I'd seen sites of incarceration, punishment and torture. I'd contemplated the reality of forced labour and forced starvation, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced here. One could see in the layers of earth evidence of burning, the lasting reality of the bodies destroyed by fire. What fascinates me about this image, again, and the similarity between these images and that, you know, I've got the great honour of being the media representative on the Remembering Srebrenica East Midlands board, you know, so to be in a situation with talking with Kim and some of the colleagues about, with young people about these situations and looking at images is, yes, there's the standing up to genocide or Holocaust deniers. There's representing those images in a way that putting them into context for people, and also looking at the normal signs of life that still exist, as you said in your website. But this also is really important, isn't it? The continual investigation and solving of issues and finding evidence of what's going on, because ultimately a lot of people will say, if they're not a full-blown Holocaust genocide denier, will turn around and say it was a long time ago, let's move on, let's put it all behind us. I've even heard say people, maybe we should all get on, which of course is totally ironic in 2020. It's probably it's worse now than it's ever been. But yeah. Do you when you see something like this, how does it put your work into context, what you do with the book and then with the website?
It's a very good question, and this is a very uncomfortable image in many respects, because I think it tells you probably this is the direct equivalent of those films that are still available that show Jewish people being lined up in a pit and then being shot in the back of the neck, and so they fall into the pit and the pit becomes the grave. This is an image of that. It also becomes those sort of photographs that exist of almost like the cleaning up, and I hate to use that phrase, of Bergen-Belsen, when people realised that the only thing that could be done for these people was to put them back into a big mass grave, but to honour that grave. This is the legacy. This is the modern sort of topical thing. Even though this was taken, a number of years ago, it's this sort of thing that brings this to life. And it just so happened on the very day that I was visiting Sobibor, and it's a really difficult place to get to. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's on the border between Poland and the Ukraine. It just so happened that on this particular day this was going on, and when I asked my guys what's happening here, he said, "This is like a mass grave. This is what's going on now," and the Polish government is, to its great credit, is still looking for remnants of people that can be DNA, perhaps even DNA identified as individual people, but where it's not, it's giving people a bit more dignity, in the sense that the remains that are found are then reburied with a proper Jewish burial rites and ceremony and so forth. So it's a very fitting way of doing it. But it brings home to you all of the absolute enormity of this, that when you look at those graves that we saw before in the wood cemetery, it's like they, in many respects, were the fortunate ones. They did have graves that could be identified, even if their names couldn't be identified, their bodies were intact and could have their own recognised place of work. Here you're talking about thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people that were literally turned into ash. And I guess, the sight of, it's those layers of destruction that you sort of see in sort of geology sites, where it tells you, you go down to the earth, this was the particular time of this and so forth. There is a layer of darkness, a layer of blackness, and that is the death, that's the burning. And I guess what attacked me on that day was not just my vision, it was the smell. There was a smell. The smell had been unleashed by excavation. And I couldn't describe what that smell was. It was totally different to anything that I'd ever experienced before. And this really brings it home to you, because, if you go to, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka, Auschwitz, Majdanek, these sorts of places, when you walk around Auschwitz, you are walking potentially on the sides of people's ashes, because they're everywhere. And I think that you can't see this stuff until it's actually given right in front of you. There is the evidence. That dark layer of ash is the remnants of people, of ordinary people living ordinary lives, but special people as well, and special people that need to be remembered.
Yeah, I think we'll draw it to a close now. Okay, I'm just thinking, if you're talking to young people, and Paul was mentioning about, a great educational resource as well, how do we get something like this that maybe isn't necessarily full of the horror or the sort of the images that we know that get used and wheeled out to talk about it, but in a way that we can have those kind of more contemporary conversations about how it fits with modern day, whether it's the Uyghurs in China or the Rohingya in Myanmar, the conversations that we can have about how easy it is to go from nothing, Andy talking about the 3 years it took Germany to do that, but also the fact that it's so easy when one group of people decide that another group of people aren't worthy, and you go down that road, and then suddenly it almost becomes, sometimes I read a lot about genocides, and I often think that some people turn around and go, well, that's not as many as this one, or it wasn't as many as that. You know what I mean? So then is it genocide or is it ethnic cleansing? And we get caught up in the terminology of it. Do you think one of the most important things that we can do is talk to ordinary people about how they can push back against this stuff by keeping governments able and willing and almost not able to stop looking like the Polish government? Do you think there's a lot of ways of doing that, getting other governments as well to keep it alive and push back against the Holocaust deniers by constantly looking at these sites and keeping them there, but also to keep looking?
Yes, I've got no question about that. I think it maybe it poses issues for those of us that live in countries in which the Holocaust was a bit less of a direct experience. Obviously, there were British victims of the Holocaust. There was a concentration camp on the Channel Islands, for example, that on British soil that can be seen. But when you go obviously to Poland, to Czech Republic, into Ukraine, into what was Soviet Russia, which even if you go to France, Germany, and everything, the visible sites are still there, and so the idea of historical record is something that governments there are doing all the time, and I think it's those sorts of things need to be supported, and they are being supported. In a sense, the Holocaust Educational Trust in this country, it still sponsors, although in these COVID times it's been difficult to do this year. It still sponsors trips that take sixth formers from UK schools out to Auschwitz, out to Krakow to learn from that experience. So that is still happening. And I think as well, John, it's about recognizing dates. And I come back to, I started by saying that November the 9th is a particularly evocative date in German history. And actually, the Germans have a name for this day, and they call it Schicksalstag, which means a day of fate. And so many things happened in German history on November the 9th. The Kaiser abdicated in 1918, obviously, culmination of the First World War. Hitler marched in Munich at the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. Obviously, it was a failed attempt to seize power, but it was a precursor of what was to come. And of course, in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down on November the 9th. But what we remembered, I guess, within the Jewish communities today is the night of Kristallnacht. It's the night of the 9th and the 10th of November, where for lots and lots of German citizens who were turning the other way when all this was happening, it really hit home to lots of people. Oh my gosh, this is happening in my own country. This is happening on my own streets. This was a night when the Nazi state, effectively sanctioned the destruction of Jewish synagogues, of Jewish businesses, of Jewish shops, of Jewish homes. It led to the detention of Jewish people, and it also led to the deaths of about 90 Jewish individuals. So, and the day after, the reason it was called Kristallnacht, the day of crystal glass, was that all around the streets of Berlin, Munich, Hamburg, Leipzig, and all the rest, you got a shimmering sight of broken glass on those streets. So it's commemorating those days. It's keeping these days alive in people's memories. And I think it empowers us not just to recognize that anti-Semitism is still very much alive, and sadly well in contemporary society. It's a terrible legacy of a genocide in which we said never again so many times, that we are seeing it again. Anti-Semitism has never gone away. It existed before the Nazis. It still exists after the Nazis, and it's alive, and it needs to be pushed. It needs to be pushed back. It needs to be countered. but of course that's only one issue. It's only one form of discrimination. Anti-Islamophobia, homophobia, anti-Ziganism, the destruction, fear and prejudice against the gypsy traveller communities. All these things are as alive today as they ever have been. And I think this is the thing that Germany provides, a thing that lots of commentators said at the time, lots of reviewers have analysed since. Germany, a highly civilized, supposed first world nation. Germany, the country of Schiller, of Goethe, of Bach, of Beethoven. Germany, the centre, as we've already said, of a very liberal agenda of gay rights and transphobic rights, much much ahead of its time, if you like, in terms of what was happening there in the 20s and 30s, and what you compare with the Jewish right, HNG, LGBT rights today. It's all there, and if it can happen in Germany, it can happen anywhere. And I think that's what keeps us. One of the pictures I've got, and I'll leave it possibly at that, John, is a picture of what was the Gestapo HQ in Prague. And there's a plaque on the wall, and you see it in one of my images, and there's an image in Czech, there's a wording in Czech underneath it, and the wording is, be vigilant. So it calls on us all, don't rest on our laurels, look around for where this can still happen, where it still is happening, and everybody can do their bit to address that, because we need to do it.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Julian, thank you so much. Again, it's the fact that we're friends, I think, is even better, because you're always so willing to do it. Like I said, whether it was suspended disbelief or the website now. I mean, Andy, Paul seconded Andy's comment, which is that we all need to give you a virtual hug, because it's a really good thing that you've done, and I think it's really important. And it's certainly, we're doing this today as the Conflict Reportage Archive, which this book and your website will now be part of. I think, it certainly has inspired me, the conversations I've had with Paul, Dr. Paul Riley, who is our academic researcher in residence, which is fantastic here at the Doc Media Centre, to look at a new think tank, that kind of conflict memory in education. How can we do that? And Andy was saying, what can he do to help? And I just think, well, maybe it's those memoirs, what I mean? It's having both sides of the story. How can we get people having that conversation? And one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, and telling people that are watching on Facebook, is to pick a selection of your images that we can then actually get blown up. And so over Holocaust Memorial Day in January, which is a Wednesday, that week, we're going to have an exhibition, which hopefully we can physically invite people to, or we'll do a live stream of you kind of walking around, maybe talking about some of that stuff. And that will be our first dip into the conflict memory and education think tank. So again, thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate it. Please look at the comments. There's a lot of warmth and love for you on there, as I'm sure you already know from the people that are involved. And it's been great that we can record this as well. So this Zoom recording has been captured as well as the Facebook live stream. Share it with people and get people thinking about it. Okay, that's great.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you.
No worries at all. I'm going to finish the Facebook live stream now. Okay.
Okay, my friend.
See you later, Jules. Thanks.
Take care, mate. See you later. Bye. Bye.